So here's the thing about being the only human on a space station populated by 47 different alien species. You become something of a novelty. Not the good kind, mind you. More like the, oh look, the primitive bipedal mammal is trying to use the food dispenser again, kind of novelty. Station Nexus 7 was supposed to be this grand experiment in interspecies cooperation, a shining beacon of unity in the vast, cold expanse of space. What it actually was a floating diplomatic nightmare where everyone spoke 14 different languages. Nobody could agree on what constituted appropriate temperature, and the plumbing was designed by committee. If you've ever wondered what happens when you let a crystalline resonance entity, a methane-breathing slug thing, and a hive mind collective design a bathroom together, I can tell you, nothing good. But I digress. The point is, I'd been living on this metallic purgatory for about 8 months, when Zarkethel decided she wanted to kill me. Not metaphorically. Literally. With weapons and everything. Now, Zarkethel, or Zara as I called her because seriously, who has time for all those apostrophes, was a Vex'thari warrior. Picture a 7-foot-tall cross between a praying mantis and a very angry ballet dancer, with chitinous armor that looked like it was forged in the fires of some seriously pissed-off gods. Her species was known throughout the galaxy for 3 things: their impeccable sense of honor, their deadly precision in combat, and their complete inability to understand sarcasm. The irony was not lost on me. I first met Zara in the station's multi-species recreational facility, which was basically a gym designed by someone who'd apparently never seen a human before. The gravity was wrong, the equipment was wrong, and the entire place smelled like a combination of ozone and what I can only describe as disappointed vegetables. I was attempting to use something that looked like a cross between a rowing machine and a medieval torture device when she approached me. Her forearms moved with liquid grace, each one ending in what appeared to be natural weapons that could probably cut through steel. Her compound eyes reflected the harsh station lighting, creating a kaleidoscope effect that was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. "You are the human," she said, her voice carrying that peculiar harmonic quality that all Vex'thari possessed. It wasn't a question. "Guilty as charged," I replied, not looking up from my futile attempts to figure out which lever was supposed to do what, though I preferred Dave if we're being formal. She stood there for a moment, studying me with the intensity of someone trying to solve a particularly complex mathematical equation, which, come to think of it, might have been exactly what she was doing. "You are smaller than I expected," she said finally. "Yeah, well, we can't all be 7 feet of exoskeletal perfection," I muttered, finally giving up on the machine and turning to face her properly. "Can I help you with something?" "I am Zarkethel of the Void Seekers clan, 3rd Circle of the Warrior's Path, bearer of the Crimson Blade." She struck a pose that would have been impressive if it weren't so completely over the top. "I have come to challenge you to honorable combat." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what now?" "You have offended the honor of my people," she declared, her voice rising to what I assumed was her dramatic proclamation volume. "Your mere presence on this station is an insult to all who follow the warrior's path. I demand satisfaction." This was, I had to admit, a new one. I'd been challenged to chess matches, eating contests, and something called dimensional argument synthesis, which I'm pretty sure was just really complicated debating. But actual combat? That was a first. "Okay, hold on," I said, raising my hands in what I hoped was a universal gesture of, let's pump the brakes here. "What exactly did I do to offend your people? Because I'm pretty sure I've never even met any other Vex'thari." Her compound eyes seemed to focus on me with laser-like intensity. "You breathe," she said simply. "Well, that's kind of necessary for me to continue existing," I pointed out. "I mean, I suppose I could stop, but that seems like it would create more problems than it solves." "Your species is weak," she continued, apparently warming to her theme. "You have no natural weapons, no armor, no enhanced senses. Yet you dare to walk among warriors as if you belong. This is an insult to the very concept of strength." I considered this for a moment. It was true that humans were, from a purely physical standpoint, kind of the universe's participation trophy. We weren't the strongest, fastest, or most durable. We didn't have claws or fangs or the ability to secrete corrosive acid. Hell, we couldn't even see in the dark without artificial assistance. "You know what?" I said finally. "You're absolutely right. We are pathetically weak. Congratulations on your superior evolution." For the first time since she'd approached me, Zara seemed genuinely taken aback. "You agree?" "Oh, absolutely. I mean, look at me." I gestured to my entirely ordinary human form. No built-in weapons, no armor plating, can't even digest cellulose properly. We're basically the galaxy's design mistakes that somehow learned to use tools. This seemed to confuse her even more. But then, why do you not show proper deference to your betters? Because, I said, grinning, being weak doesn't mean being wrong, and being strong doesn't automatically make you right. It just makes you, well, strong. The silence that followed was the kind of heavy, pregnant quiet that usually preceded either profound understanding or spectacular violence. Given that we were talking about a 7-foot-tall warrior who just challenged me to mortal combat, I was betting on the violence. "You mock me," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Actually, I'm trying to have a philosophical discussion," I replied. "But if you want to interpret that as mockery, I can't really stop you." Her forearms moved with lightning speed, and suddenly she was holding what looked like a weapon that had been designed by someone who really, really hated the concept of mercy. It was all curves and edges, with a blade that seemed to drink in the light around it. "I challenge you to formal combat," she declared. "Choose your weapon." I looked around the recreational facility. The closest thing to a weapon I could see was a piece of exercise equipment that might have been designed for cardiovascular torture. "Can I choose strongly worded letter?" "You will choose a weapon," she said, "or I will choose for you." Okay, I said, raising my hands again. "But can I at least ask what the rules are? I mean, I'm assuming this isn't to the death, right? Because the station's insurance policy probably doesn't cover death by philosophical disagreement." For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across her alien features. "Combat will be until first blood or surrender. These are the traditional rules of honorable challenge." "First blood," I repeated. "Well, that's actually not too bad. I mean, I'm pretty sure I can bleed on command if necessary." "You will not surrender without fighting," she said firmly. "That would be dishonoring." "Dishonoring to whom?" "To both of us." I had to admit there was a certain logic to it. And frankly, after 8 months of diplomatic small talk and committee meetings about air recycling protocols, the idea of a straightforward physical confrontation was almost refreshing. "All right," I said. "I accept your challenge, but I'm going to need to get my gear." "Your gear?" "Well, yeah. I mean, you've got your fancy bioweapon there, and I've got—" I gestured to my workout clothes. "This. So unless you want this to be the shortest duel in galactic history, I'm going to need to level the playing field a bit." She considered this for a moment, then nodded. "This is acceptable. We will meet in the station's formal combat chamber in 1 standard hour." "There's a formal combat chamber?" "Of course. Did you think civilized species would simply brawl in corridors like savages?" I wanted to point out that challenging someone to a duel over their breathing habits wasn't exactly the height of civilization, but I figured I'd pushed my luck far enough for one day. 1 hour, I agreed. "Should I bring refreshments? I feel like this is the kind of thing that might work up an appetite." She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word, which left me with the rather pressing problem of figuring out how to not get killed by a 7-foot-tall warrior in formal combat. The thing about being the only human on a space station is that you develop a very particular set of skills. Not the Liam Neeson kind, more like the how to jury-rig a life support system using spare parts and creative swearing kind. After 8 months of dealing with incompatible technology, impossible bureaucracy, and food that only technically qualified as edible, I'd gotten pretty good at improvisation. Which was fortunate, because I was about to improvise my way through a duel. I made my way back to my quarters, which were located in what the station manual cheerfully referred to as the multi-species habitation module, but which everyone just called the human box. It was basically a shipping container that had been retrofitted with life support and a door that only opened when it felt like it. Inside, I kept the sum total of my possessions: some clothes, a few personal items, and a small collection of things that I'd acquired during my time on the station. Most of it was junk, but some of it was the kind of junk that might prove useful in a pinch. Like the ceremonial knife I'd been given by the Corvan delegation during a particularly tedious trade negotiation. It wasn't much to look at, basically a fancy letter opener with delusions of grandeur. But it was sharp, and it was mine. I also had a small collection of human artifacts that I'd brought with me as conversation starters. Books, music, that sort of thing. But buried in the bottom of my storage locker was something that I'd almost forgotten about. A small wooden box containing items from my previous life. My previous life as a Marine. I'd done 2 tours before deciding that civilian life held more appeal than getting shot at for a living. The transition to interspecies diplomacy had seemed like a natural progression. After all, if you could survive military bureaucracy, galactic bureaucracy was just more of the same with better food and stranger company. But I'd kept a few mementos from my military days. Dog tags, a few photos, and, most importantly, a small device that most people wouldn't have recognized as a weapon. It was a simple black cylinder, about the size of a marker, with a small button at one end. To most observers, it would have looked like a writing instrument or maybe a laser pointer. What it actually was a compressed air injector designed for emergency medical treatment. The kind of thing that could deliver a precise dose of medication through multiple layers of clothing and even light armor. Or, with a few modifications, could deliver something else entirely. I spent the next 45 minutes in what could charitably be called tactical preparation, and more accurately described as panicked improvisation. The air injector could be modified to deliver a small dose of sedative, something I'd learned during my medical training. The trick was finding the right chemical compound. Fortunately, the station's medical bay had surprisingly lax security. Apparently, when you're dealing with 47 different species, each with their own unique biochemistry, the idea of someone trying to synthesize a universal sedative was considered so improbable that it wasn't worth worrying about. They clearly hadn't met humans before. 20 minutes of creative chemistry later, I had a small dose of something that should, in theory, work on Vex'thari physiology. It wouldn't kill her, I wasn't a monster, but it would slow her down enough that I might have a chance. The other thing I did was strip down to my workout clothes and, for the first time in months, really look at myself in the mirror. I'd always been in decent shape. Military training has a way of staying with you, but 8 months of station life had left me looking a bit soft around the edges. Still, I was human, which meant I was built for endurance rather than power. If I could make this a war of attrition rather than a sprint, I might have a chance. And then there was the tattoo. I'd gotten it during my second tour, along with most of my unit. It was a simple design, a stylized earth with a pair of wings behind it, surrounded by text in a dozen different languages. The same phrase, repeated over and over. Never give up. It covered most of my back, and I'd honestly forgotten about it until I saw it in the mirror. Just a reminder of a time when giving up wasn't an option, when pushing through was the only choice you had. Looking at it now, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've been through worse and survived. I might not have claws or armor or the ability to secrete poison, but I had something else. Something that had gotten humans through everything from saber-toothed tigers to nuclear wars, to the bureaucratic nightmare of interstellar diplomacy. I had stubbornness, and sometimes that's enough. The formal combat chamber was exactly what you'd expect from a space station designed by committee. Functional, sterile, and completely devoid of anything that might be considered aesthetically pleasing. It was a circular room with a raised platform in the center, surrounded by seating for observers. The walls were lined with weapon racks containing an impressive array of implements designed for creative violence. When I arrived, Zara was already there, performing what appeared to be some kind of ritual preparation. She moved through a series of complex forms, her forearms weaving intricate patterns in the air. Her natural weapon gleamed in the harsh chamber lighting, and she moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent their entire life preparing for moments like this. I felt a bit underdressed. "You came," she said, not looking up from her routine. "Yeah, well, I had some time to kill," I replied, then immediately regretted my choice of words. Figure of speech. She finished her forms and turned to face me. "You look different." I glanced down at myself. I'd changed into my old military fatigues, not because they offered any protection, but because they felt right. Sometimes, when you're about to do something stupid, it helps to dress the part. "Just thought I'd go with something more appropriate for the occasion," I said. "Those are warrior's garments," she observed, in a manner of speaking. She studied me for a moment, her compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lights. "You were a soldier." "I was a Marine," I corrected. "There's a difference." "Explain." I considered how to put it in terms she'd understand. "Soldiers fight wars, Marines fight everything else." For the first time since I'd met her, something that might have been respect flickered across her features. "You have seen combat." "Some. Against worthy opponents?" I thought about my tours. The heat, the dust, the weight of gear, the constant awareness that everything could go wrong in an instant. "They thought they were." She nodded slowly. "This explains much." "Does it? When I first saw you, I thought you were simply another weak creature, soft from a life of ease. But you carry yourself differently now. You stand like someone who has faced death and found it acceptable." I shrugged. "We all die eventually. The trick is making sure it's for something worthwhile." "This is wisdom," she said. "I begin to understand why your species has earned its reputation." "Our reputation? You do not know?" She tilted her head in what I was beginning to recognize as a gesture of surprise. "Humans are spoken of throughout the galaxy, not for your strength or your speed, but for your persistence." "Persistence?" "You do not break," she said simply. Other species, when faced with impossible odds, will retreat or surrender. Humans do not. I felt a weird little surge of pride at that. We're too stupid to know when to quit. Perhaps. Or perhaps you understand something that the rest of us do not. She raised her weapon, settling into a combat stance. Shall we begin? I looked around the chamber one more time. The weapon racks were well stocked, but everything there was designed for species with natural advantages I didn't possess. Longer reach, stronger grips, better reflexes. I could pick up a sword, but Zara would have me cut down before I could even figure out which end was the business end. Actually, I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out the ceremonial knife, I think I'll stick with what I know. She looked at the small blade with what I could only describe as confusion. That is, a very small weapon. Yeah, well, I'm a very small person, I said, then grinned. Comparatively speaking, you cannot possibly hope to match my reach with such a weapon. Probably not, I agreed. But then again, I don't plan to match your reach. What do you plan to do? Improvise. She considered this for a moment, then nodded. Very well, combat will begin on my signal. She raised her weapon high above her head. May your ancestors find honor in your effort, even if it is futile. Thanks, I said. I'll be sure to tell them you said that. She brought her weapon down, and the fight began. Zara moved like liquid death, her forearms working in perfect coordination. Her natural weapon swept through the air where I'd been standing a split second before, and I felt the wind from its passage ruffle my hair. She was fast, faster than I'd expected, but she was also precise. Too precise. She fought like someone who had spent their entire life training against opponents who followed the same rules she did. Every move was perfect, every strike calculated for maximum efficiency. It was beautiful in its own way, like watching a deadly dance. But it was also predictable. I ducked under another strike, rolled to the side, and came up behind her. The knife flashed out, aiming for a spot between her shoulder blades that looked like it might be vulnerable. She spun with inhuman speed, blocking the strike with one of her secondary arms. You are faster than I expected, she said, sounding almost pleased. I'm full of surprises, I replied, already moving again. We circled each other, and I began to understand the fundamental difference between human and Vex'thari combat philosophy. She fought like a warrior, formal, precise, honorable. I fought like a soldier, dirty, practical, and completely without shame. When she struck high, I went low. When she expected me to retreat, I advanced. When she tried to establish distance, I closed it. I didn't fight her weapon, I fought her expectations. And slowly, gradually, I began to see frustration creep into her movements. You do not fight with honor, she said, parrying another of my attacks. I fight to win, I replied, already moving to exploit the opening her parry had created. These are the same thing. No, I said, landing a shallow cut on her forearm that drew a thin line of blue-green blood. They're really not. She looked down at the wound with what appeared to be genuine surprise. First blood, she said quietly. Yeah, I said, backing away and lowering my weapon. I guess so. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the life support systems. Zara stood perfectly still, staring at her wounded arm as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. You have won, she said finally. I have. But you are weak. Compared to you? Absolutely. Then how? I wiped the blade clean on my shirt and slipped it back into my pocket. Being weak doesn't mean being helpless. Sometimes it just means being creative. She was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those compound eyes. You did not use your full strength. What do you mean? The weapon you carry. It is not the one you truly intended to use. I felt a chill run down my spine. I don't know what you're talking about. The device in your other pocket. The one that smells of chemical compounds and compressed air. She tilted her head. Did you think I would not notice? I'd forgotten about Vex'thari's senses. Of course, she'd detected the modified injector. Yeah, well, backup plans are kind of a human thing. You could have used it at any time during our combat. It would have ended the fight immediately. Probably. Why did you not? I thought about it for a moment. Because you were right. This was about honor, and there's no honor in cheating. Even when your life was at stake? My life wasn't at stake, I said. This was first blood, remember? Besides, you're not the kind of person who would have killed me even if you'd won. You're too principled. She stared at me for a long moment, then did something I'd never seen a Vex'thari do before. She laughed. It was a strange sound, like wind chimes made of metal and crystal, but it was definitely laughter. You are very strange, Dave Human, she said. Yeah, I get that a lot. You fight without honor, yet you refuse to dishonor yourself. You admit weakness, yet you do not surrender. You prepare for treachery, yet you choose honesty. She shook her head. I do not understand your species. Join the club, I said. We don't understand us either. Perhaps, she said. That is why you are so dangerous. Word travels fast on a space station, especially when that word involves the only human on board defeating a Vex'thari warrior in formal combat. By the time I made it back to my quarters, I'd been congratulated by 3 different species, challenged to contest by 2 others, and propositioned by something that I'm pretty sure was a sentient gas cloud. It was, in other words, just another day at Nexus 7. I was just settling down to enjoy what passed for dinner when my door chimed. I opened it to find Zara standing in the corridor, looking significantly less homicidal than she had a few hours earlier. Dave Human, she said formally, I have come to honor my defeat. You don't need to do that, I said. I mean, it was just a friendly duel, right? There is no such thing as a friendly duel, she said seriously. All combat is serious. All victory must be acknowledged. Okay, I said, stepping aside to let her in. Would you like to sit down? I was just about to eat some. Well, I'm not entirely sure what it is, but it's allegedly edible. She looked around my small quarters with what appeared to be professional interest. You live simply. Not much choice. This is pretty much all the space they gave me. Space is not what I meant. She gestured to the sparse furnishings. Your possessions, they are minimal. I'm not much of a collector, I said. Besides, most of the stuff I really care about wouldn't mean much to anyone else. Show me. I wasn't sure why, but something in her tone made it seem less like a request and more like a challenge. I went to my storage locker and pulled out the small wooden box I'd retrieved earlier. Just some old military stuff, I said, opening it to reveal the dog tags, photos, and a few other mementos. Nothing special. She picked up one of the photos, a group shot of my unit during training. These are your packmates. My what? Your squadron? Unit? The word does not translate well. She studied the photo intently. You were their leader. How can you tell? The way they stand, the way they look at you. She set the photo down carefully. You were responsible for their lives. We were responsible for each other's lives, I corrected. That's how it works. And did you succeed? I felt the familiar weight of that question. Mostly, but not entirely. No, I said quietly. Not entirely. She nodded as if she'd expected that answer. This is the burden of leadership, to carry the weight of those you could not save. I suppose. It is why you fight the way you do. Not for glory or honor, but for survival. For the survival of others. I looked at her sharply. What makes you say that? During our combat, you had many opportunities to strike for a killing blow. You did not. Even when you had the advantage, you chose the path that would end the fight with the least harm to both of us. She picked up another photo. This one of me and my squad during a brief leave. This is not the behavior of a warrior seeking glory. This is the behavior of a guardian. I'm not a guardian, I said. I'm just a guy trying to get by. Are you? She turned to face me fully. Then why did you come here? To this station, to this life among aliens who do not understand you. I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. The job paid well, and it seemed interesting. You left a world where you were understood, where you belonged, to come to a place where you are the only one of your kind, where every day is a struggle to communicate, to find common ground, to prevent misunderstandings from becoming conflicts. She tilted her head. This is not the choice of someone who seeks comfort. Maybe I'm just stupid. No, she said firmly. You are exactly what I said you were. A guardian. You came here not for yourself, but because someone needed to build bridges between species who might otherwise remain enemies. I felt uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was heading. I'm really not that noble. Most of the time, I'm just trying to figure out how to make the food dispenser work. Small acts of guardianship are still guardianship, she said. You may not be protecting lives in the traditional sense, but you are protecting something perhaps more valuable. The possibility of understanding between species. That's a pretty way of putting it. It is the truth. She moved toward the door, then paused. There is something you should know, Dave Human. What's that? I did not challenge you because I believed you were weak. No. I challenged you because I believed you were dangerous. I felt a chill run down my spine. Dangerous how? Your species has a reputation, as I told you. But it is not the reputation you think it is. She turned back to face me. You are not known for your persistence, though that is part of it. You are known for your ability to change others. Change them how? Every species that has encountered humans has been affected by the contact. Some become more aggressive, trying to match your intensity. Others become more cooperative, inspired by your ability to work together. But all are changed. That doesn't sound particularly dangerous, does it not? She smiled, a gesture that was both alien and oddly familiar. Dave Human, your species has been in contact with galactic civilization for less than 50 years. In that time, you have managed to establish diplomatic relations with over 200 species, prevent at least 3 wars, and inspire the creation of this station. That's just normal diplomacy, is it? Her compound eyes seemed to sparkle with something that might have been amusement. Most species spend centuries learning to communicate with even a handful of others. Your species does it instinctively. You make connections where others see only differences. We're just adaptable. You are transformative, she corrected. And transformation, Dave Human, is the most dangerous force in the universe. It is why some species fear you, why others are drawn to you, and why I had to test you. Test me. I had to know if you were the kind of human who would use that power responsibly. Who would choose cooperation over domination, understanding over conquest? She moved toward the door again. You passed. Wait, I said. What happens now? Now we become friends, I think. Or allies. Or whatever it is that humans and Vex'thari become when they are no longer trying to kill each other. And the whole thing about me being weak and unworthy? I never said you were unworthy, she said. I said you were weak. And you are, by any physical measure. But weakness is not the same as powerlessness, as you have shown me. She reached the door, then paused one more time. Dave Human. Yeah? The next time someone challenges you to combat, you might want to mention that you are a trained warrior. It would save everyone a great deal of time. I'll keep that in mind. Good. She stepped into the corridor, then turned back. Oh, and Dave Human? What now? You might want to put a shirt on. Your back art is quite distinctive. I blinked. My what? The markings on your back. They are impressive. Very detailed. Is it a map of some kind? I suddenly realized that I'd been walking around in just my undershirt since the fight, and that the tattoo was clearly visible through the thin fabric. It's called a tattoo. It's decorative. She nodded as if this explained everything. Human tribal markings. I should have recognized them. They're not, I started to say, then stopped. You know what? Sure. Tribal markings. That's exactly what they are. The text is in multiple languages, she observed. What does it say? Never give up. In how many languages? I thought about it. 12, I think. Maybe 13. You carry a battle cry in 13 languages on your body, she said slowly. And you wonder why I found you dangerous. It's not a battle cry. It's just a reminder. Of what? That giving up isn't an option. She was quiet for a long moment. Dave Human, do you realize what you have just told me? Not really. You have just told me that your species is so committed to not surrendering that you literally wear that commitment on your bodies, that you have made it part of your physical form, written in languages from across the galaxy. When she put it like that, it did sound pretty intense. It's just a tattoo, I said weakly. Is it? She smiled again. Dave Human, I have traveled across the galaxy. I have seen the art and customs of hundreds of species. Most create art to celebrate beauty, or to honor their gods, or to mark important events. Only humans create art to remind themselves never to surrender. That's not entirely true. No? Some of us get tattoos of butterflies and flowers and stuff. And what do those represent? I don't know. Beauty? Nature? The fact that someone made a really poor life choice after drinking too much? She laughed again, that strange crystalline sound. Even your decorative art is about transformation and growth. You truly cannot help yourselves, can you? Apparently not. This is why you are dangerous, Dave Human. Not because you are strong, but because you make others want to be stronger. Not because you are fearless, but because you make others want to be brave. Not because you never give up, but because you make others believe that giving up is not an option. She stepped fully into the corridor, and I heard her voice echoing back as she walked away. It is a very frightening gift, Dave Human. Use it wisely. I stood in my doorway for a long time after she'd gone, thinking about what she'd said. About transformation and guardianship and the responsibility that came with making others want to be better than they were. It was a lot to process. But then again, I thought as I closed the door and returned to my allegedly edible dinner, humans had never been very good at taking the easy path. We were too stubborn to give up, too curious to stop exploring, and too optimistic to believe that understanding was impossible. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Epilogue. The funny thing about making friends with a 7-foot-tall warrior who could probably cut you in half without breaking a sweat is that it tends to change your social standing pretty dramatically. Word of my victory over Zara had spread throughout the station, but more importantly, word had spread that we'd become friends. In the complex social hierarchy of Nexus 7, having a Vex'thari warrior as an ally was like having a letter of recommendation from the universe itself. Suddenly, I was being invited to diplomatic receptions, asked to mediate disputes, and generally treated like someone whose opinions mattered. It was a dramatic change from my previous status as that human who keeps trying to use the food dispenser wrong. Zara, for her part, seemed to enjoy her new role as my unofficial cultural interpreter. She took it upon herself to explain human behavior to anyone who would listen, which led to some interesting conversations. You see, I overheard her telling a group of crystalline resonance entities one day. Humans do not show weakness when they admit they do not know something. They show wisdom. This is why they ask so many questions. But surely ignorance is shameful, one of the entities replied, their voice like the sound of wind through crystal chimes. Not to humans, Zara said firmly. To humans, ignorance is simply a temporary condition, something to be corrected through learning. This is why they are so adaptable, another entity observed. They do not see unfamiliarity as a threat to their identity, but as an opportunity to expand it. Exactly, Zara said, and I could hear the enthusiasm in her harmonic voice. This is what makes them dangerous. They change everything they touch, not through force, but through curiosity. I decided it was probably time to interrupt before she started telling people I was some kind of cosmic force of nature. Hey Zara, I called out, approaching the group. What's the topic of discussion? We were discussing human adaptability, she said, her compound eyes reflecting the station's artificial lighting. Specifically, your species' tendency to transform situations through persistent inquiry. She's making us sound way more impressive than we actually are, I told the crystalline entities. Most of the time we're just confused and trying to figure out what's going on. But you never stop trying to figure it out, one of the entities pointed out. That is the remarkable thing. Well, yeah, I said, shrugging. I mean, what's the alternative? Just giving up? The entities exchanged what I assumed were meaningful looks. Though to be honest, it was hard to tell with beings made of living crystal. This is what I mean, Zara said quietly. They do not even realize they are doing it. Over the following weeks, I found myself increasingly involved in the station's day-to-day operations. Not officially, I was still just a diplomatic attaché with a specialty in interspecies communication, but practically. People had started coming to me with problems that didn't quite fit into any official category. Like the ongoing dispute between the methane breathers and the oxygen breathers over ventilation systems. Or the cultural misunderstanding between the hive mind collective and the radical individualists from the outer rim. Or the time the station's AI developed what could only be described as depression, after being asked to calculate the probability of successful long-term peace between all member species. It's because you're neutral, Zara explained when I asked her why everyone kept bringing their problems to me. You have no species-specific agenda, no cultural bias that favors one solution over another. Everyone has cultural bias, I pointed out. I'm human. I think human thoughts and make human assumptions. Yes, but human assumptions are strange, she said. You assume that different species can coexist. You assume that communication is possible even when it seems impossible. You assume that problems have solutions, even when no one can see what those solutions might be. Those aren't assumptions, I said. Those are just obvious facts. Are they? She tilted her head in that gesture I'd learned indicated either deep thought or mild amusement. Dave Human, most species in the galaxy operate on the assumption that their way of thinking is the correct way, and that other species are simply defective versions of themselves. That's stupid. Is it, or is it natural? Most species evolved in isolation, developing their own unique approaches to survival and social organization. When they encounter other species, the natural response is to see differences as threats to be eliminated or obstacles to be overcome. But that's not what humans do? No, she agreed. Humans see differences as puzzles to be solved. This is why you are so effective at diplomacy, even when you do not realize you are being diplomatic. I thought about that for a moment. I'm not sure I follow. This morning you spent 20 minutes helping the aquatic delegation figure out how to adjust their environmental suits for the new atmospheric mixture. Yesterday you mediated a dispute between the photosynthetic collective and the carnivorous alliance over seating arrangements in the cafeteria. Last week, you single-handedly prevented a diplomatic incident by explaining human humor to the literal-minded coalition. Those weren't diplomatic missions, I protested. Those were just problems that needed solving. Yes, she said patiently. That is exactly my point. The more I thought about it, the more I realized she might be right. I hadn't set out to become the station's unofficial problem solver. It had just happened. People had problems, I had time, and most of the time there were solutions that worked for everyone if you were willing to look for them. It wasn't rocket science. It was just human nature, I guess. But apparently human nature was more unusual than I'd realized. The real test came about 3 months after my duel with Zara, when the station faced what the administrators delicately referred to as a significant interspecies incident. What had actually happened was that the Warrior Culture Coalition had challenged the Peaceful Coexistence Alliance to what amounted to a formal war over what was essentially a parking dispute. The details were complicated, but the basic issue was that 2 different species had fundamentally incompatible ideas about the proper use of a shared docking bay. The Warrior Coalition believed that docking priority should be determined by combat prowess and military achievement. The Peaceful Alliance believed that docking priority should be determined by cooperative negotiation and shared consensus. Both sides had valid points, according to their respective cultural frameworks. Both sides were also completely unwilling to compromise. And somehow everyone had decided that I was the person to solve it. Why me? I asked the station administrator, a being that looked like a cross between a jellyfish and a filing cabinet. I'm not a mediator. I'm not a judge. I'm just a guy who happens to be good at talking to people. That, the administrator said in a voice like rustling paper, is precisely why you are the ideal choice for this assignment. But I don't know anything about Warrior Coalition customs, or Peaceful Alliance protocols, or interstellar law for that matter. Knowledge can be acquired, the administrator said. Wisdom is more difficult to obtain. I'm not wise, I protested. I'm just persistent. Yes, the administrator said, somehow managing to sound amused, despite lacking anything that resembled a mouth. We know. So I found myself sitting in Conference Room 7, which had been hastily cleared of all potential weapons, facing representatives from 2 species who had apparently decided that the best way to resolve a parking dispute was through military action. On one side was Commander Vex'thari, a member of the Saurian hegemony, and a veteran of what he kept referring to as the glorious campaigns of the 7th Stellar Quadrant. He was about 8 feet tall, covered in scales that looked like they'd been designed by someone who really liked the color red, and he had a tendency to punctuate his sentences by striking the table with his fist. On the other side was Harmony Singer Veltar, a representative of the empathic collective, and a being who apparently communicated primarily through emotional resonance and interpretive dance. She was about 3 feet tall, covered in what looked like luminescent fur, and she had a tendency to change colors based on her emotional state. Between them, they had about as much in common as a nuclear reactor and a butterfly. The issue, Commander Vex'thari said, striking the table hard enough to make my teeth rattle, is one of honor. The Saurian hegemony has earned the right to priority docking through superior martial achievement. To deny this is to deny the natural order of strength. Harmony Singer Veltar immediately shifted to a deep purple color and began what I assumed was an interpretive dance representing profound disagreement. The emotional resonance that accompanied it felt like a combination of disappointment and the desire to hug someone very hard. I think, I said carefully, that we might be approaching this from the wrong angle. Both representatives turned to look at me. Commander Vex'thari's expression suggested that I had just volunteered to be his next target in a combat exercise. Harmony Singer Veltar's color shifted to a cautious yellow-green. What do you mean? Commander Vex'thari demanded. Well, I said, you're both talking about docking priority as if it's a limited resource. But is it, really? Of course it is, Commander Vex'thari said. There are only 12 docking bays. There are 47 species on this station. Priority must be determined by some method. But who says it has to be determined by the same method for everyone? I asked. Harmony Singer Veltar's color shifted to a curious blue-green, and she began a dance that felt like a question mark made of emotion. I don't follow, Commander Vex'thari said. Look, I said, the Saurian hegemony values martial achievement. The empathic collective values cooperative harmony. Those aren't contradictory values, they're just different approaches to the same basic goal. Which is? Making sure everyone gets what they need. I stood up and moved to the wall display, calling up a schematic of the station's docking facilities. What if we divided the docking bays into different categories? Some bays reserved for species that prefer competitive allocation, others reserved for species that prefer cooperative allocation, and maybe a few neutral bays for species that don't have strong preferences either way. Commander Vex'thari stared at the display for a long moment. You would accommodate both systems? Why not? I said. You're not trying to dock in the same place at the same time. You're just trying to dock. As long as everyone gets access to docking facilities that work for them, does it really matter how those facilities are allocated? Harmony Singer Vex'thari had turned a bright, cheerful yellow and was performing what I interpreted as a dance of cautious optimism. This is... Commander Vex'thari paused, apparently searching for the right word. Acceptable. More than acceptable, I said. It's efficient. Instead of spending time and energy fighting over one allocation system, we create multiple systems that work for different species. Everyone gets what they need, and no one has to compromise their cultural values. But how do we determine which species use which system? Commander Vex'thari asked. Easy, I said. We ask them. Both representatives stared at me. We ask them, Commander Vex'thari repeated. Sure. We send out a survey. Hey, when it comes to docking priority, do you prefer competitive allocation, cooperative allocation, or are you flexible? Most species will have a preference based on their cultural background. The ones that don't, we put in the neutral category. Harmony Singer Vex'thari was now a brilliant gold color, and dancing what I could only describe as an interpretive representation of, why didn't we think of this before? It's so simple, Commander Vex'thari said, sounding almost disappointed. The best solutions usually are, I said. Complex problems don't always require complex solutions. Sometimes they just require looking at the problem from a different angle. This is acceptable, Commander Vex'thari said formally. The Saurian hegemony will agree to this arrangement. Harmony Singer Vex'thari's dance became positively exuberant, and the emotional resonance was like being hugged by a rainbow. Great, I said. I'll draft a proposal for the station administration. Should have it ready by tomorrow. Dave Human, Commander Vex'thari said as I was packing up my notes. Yeah? You have prevented a war today. I've prevented a really stupid war, I corrected. There's a difference. Is there? I thought about it for a moment. Maybe not. But I like to think that most wars are really stupid when you get right down to it. This is wisdom, he said, then paused. Would you be interested in joining the Saurian hegemony? We could use someone with your strategic thinking. Thanks, but I'm pretty happy where I am, I said. Besides, I don't think I'm cut out for the military life. You were a soldier, he pointed out. I was a Marine, I corrected, and I retired for a reason. Which was? I got tired of shooting at problems instead of solving them. Commander Vex'thari was quiet for a long moment. Perhaps, he said finally, this is why your species is so effective at diplomacy. Maybe, I said. Or maybe we're just too lazy to fight wars when talking works better. He laughed, a sound like rocks falling down a mountain. Dave Human, if laziness produces results like this, then perhaps laziness is a virtue. I'll be sure to put that on my next performance review. The docking bay solution worked perfectly, which shouldn't have surprised me but somehow did. Within a week, the station had implemented a 3-tier allocation system, and the great parking dispute had been resolved to everyone's satisfaction. More importantly, other species had started to take notice of the approach. Instead of fighting over incompatible systems, they were beginning to ask whether there might be ways to accommodate multiple approaches to the same problem. It was, Zara informed me, unprecedented. Most interspecies conflicts are resolved through dominance, she explained over dinner in the station's multi-species cafeteria. One species imposes its will on another, or both species find a compromise that neither side really likes. But that's not what happened here, I said, trying to identify what I was eating. It was purple, it tasted like cinnamon mixed with motor oil, and it was supposedly a delicacy on 3 different worlds. No, she agreed. What happened here was accommodation. You found a way for both sides to get what they actually wanted, instead of forcing them to fight over what they thought they wanted. It wasn't that complicated, I said. They both wanted to use the docking bays. They just wanted to use them differently. And you saw that the difference in method did not require a difference in outcome. Yeah, I guess so. Dave Human, do you realize what you have done? Solved a parking dispute? You have demonstrated that cultural differences can be assets rather than obstacles, she said. You have shown that it is possible to accommodate multiple approaches to the same problem without anyone having to abandon their values. That's just logical. Is it? She leaned forward, her compound eyes reflecting the cafeteria's artificial lighting. Dave Human, most species spend centuries learning to coexist with even a handful of others. They do so by finding common ground, by identifying shared values and building on them. That makes sense? But that is not what you did. You did not look for common ground. You looked for ways to let each species maintain their own ground while still achieving their goals. I considered this while attempting to figure out if the purple stuff was supposed to be chewed or swallowed whole. I guess I just don't see why people have to change who they are in order to get along. Because most species believe that coexistence requires conformity, she said. That peace can only be achieved when everyone agrees on the same basic approach to problems. But that's not true? No, she agreed. It is not, but it is what most species believe. It is what I believed until I met you. What do you believe now? She was quiet for a moment, considering the question. I believe that your species may be the first to understand that diversity is not a problem to be solved, but a resource to be utilized. That's a nice way of putting it. It is more than nice, Dave Human. It is revolutionary. I felt uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was taking. I'm not trying to start a revolution. I'm just trying to make sure everyone gets along. Those may be the same thing, she said quietly. Over the following months, I found myself increasingly involved in what the station administration had started calling interspecies innovation projects. Basically, situations where different species' approaches to the same problem could be combined to create solutions that were better than anything any single species could have developed alone. Like the time the Hive Mind Collective's distributed decision-making system was combined with the Individualistic Alliance's creative problem-solving approach to redesign the station's resource allocation protocols. Or when the Photosynthetic Collective's energy-efficient manufacturing techniques were integrated with the Industrial Coalition's mass production capabilities to create a new type of environmental recycling system. Each project was different, but they all followed the same basic pattern. Instead of trying to force different species to use the same approach, we found ways to let each species contribute their unique strengths to a shared goal. It was, according to the station's efficiency reports, the most productive period in Nexus 7's history. It was also, according to me, the most fun I'd had since joining the diplomatic corps. You enjoy this? Zara observed one day as we reviewed the latest project proposals. Yeah, I do, I admitted. It's like, I don't know, like solving puzzles. Except the puzzles involve people, and the solutions help everyone. And you do not find it exhausting, all of this constant negotiation and adaptation? Not really, I said. I mean, it's challenging, but it's not draining. It's more like energizing. This is very human, she said. What do you mean? Most species find interspecies contact to be stressful. It requires constant vigilance, constant adjustment, constant awareness of potential misunderstandings. But humans seem to thrive on it. Maybe we're just weird that way. Or maybe you are adapted for it, she said thoughtfully. Dave Human, what was Earth like before your species achieved interstellar travel? Complicated, I said. I mean, we had hundreds of different countries, thousands of different cultures, millions of different languages and customs and ways of thinking about things. And how did you manage to coexist? We didn't mostly, I said. We spent most of our history fighting each other over resources and territory, and whose god was the right one. But you eventually learned to cooperate. Some of us did, others are still working on it. But the process of learning to cooperate with other humans prepared you for learning to cooperate with other species. I guess so. I mean, if you can figure out how to get along with people who speak different languages, and have different customs, and believe different things about the universe, figuring out how to get along with aliens is just more of the same, really. This is what I mean, she said. Most species evolved in isolation. They developed one approach to social organization, one way of thinking about problems, one set of cultural values. When they encounter other species, it is like encountering a completely alien way of thinking. But for humans, encountering alien ways of thinking is just Tuesday. Exactly. She gestured to the project proposals spread across the table. This is why you are so effective at interspecies diplomacy. You have been practicing intercultural diplomacy for thousands of years. That's actually kind of depressing when you put it that way. Why? Because it suggests that the only reason we're good at getting along with aliens is because we're so bad at getting along with each other. No, she said firmly. It suggests that you are good at getting along with aliens because you have learned that differences do not have to be threats, that diversity can be a strength rather than a weakness. I hope you're right. I am right, she said. And Dave Human? Yeah? The rest of the galaxy is beginning to notice. She wasn't kidding. Over the next few months, I started receiving communications from other stations, other diplomatic missions, other interspecies organizations. They'd heard about the Nexus 7 approach to interspecies cooperation, and they wanted to know more. Some wanted to implement similar programs. Others wanted to invite me to consult on their own interspecies challenges. A few wanted to study human diplomatic techniques for academic purposes. All of them seemed to be under the impression that I was some kind of expert on interspecies relations. I'm not an expert, I told Zara after receiving yet another invitation to speak at the Galactic Conference on Interspecies Understanding. I'm just a guy who happens to be good at talking to people. Dave, human, she said patiently. You have successfully mediated disputes between 37 different species. You have developed innovative solutions to problems that have been causing conflicts for decades. You have created a model for interspecies cooperation that is being studied and implemented throughout the galaxy. That's just what needed to be done. Yes, she said. That is exactly the point. I don't follow. You do not see yourself as an expert because you do not think of what you do as expertise. You think of it as simply doing what needs to be done. Well, yeah, this is why you are so effective. You do not approach interspecies relations as an academic exercise or a diplomatic challenge. You approach it as a series of practical problems that need practical solutions, because that's what they are. No, she said. They are what you make them. Another species might see the same situations as cultural conflicts that require careful negotiation and formal protocols. You see them as puzzles that need creative solutions. Tomato, tomato. Dave, human, do you remember what I told you about your species' reputation? You said we were known for being persistent. I said you were known for being transformative, for changing everything you touch. She leaned forward, her compound eyes reflecting the station's artificial lighting. This is what you have done here. You have transformed the way different species think about coexistence. I've just been doing my job. Have you? Or have you been doing something entirely new? I thought about it for a moment. I honestly don't know anymore. Then let me tell you what I see, she said. I see a human who has spent less than a year on this station and has fundamentally changed how 47 different species interact with each other. I see someone who has taken problems that seemed impossible to solve and made them seem simple. They were simple, people just made them complicated. Perhaps. But simplicity is often the most difficult thing to achieve. She stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the stars. Dave, human, when I first challenged you to combat, I thought I was testing your strength. And instead you were testing my adaptability. No, she said. I was testing your humanity. My what? Your essential humanness. Your ability to find solutions where others see only problems. Your refusal to accept that differences must lead to conflict. Your stubborn insistence that understanding is always possible. That's not uniquely human, is it not? She turned back to face me. Dave, human, in the year since you arrived at this station, the number of interspecies conflicts has decreased by 73%. The efficiency of cooperative projects has increased by 42%. The overall satisfaction rating for station life has improved across all species. That's not all because of me. No, she agreed. It is because of the approach you have demonstrated. The idea that differences can be accommodated rather than eliminated. The belief that cooperation is always possible if you are willing to be creative enough to find it. You're giving me too much credit. Am I? She smiled, that strange crystalline expression that I'd learned to recognize as affection. Dave, human, you have received invitations to consult on interspecies conflicts from 43 different star systems. The Galactic Council has asked you to present a paper on practical approaches to interspecies cooperation. 3 different universities want to offer you honorary degrees in xenodiplomacy. That's just politics. That is recognition, she said. Recognition that you have developed something new. Something that works. It's not new, I protested. It's just common sense. Common sense is often the rarest thing in the universe, she said. And Dave, human? Yeah? Your common sense appears to be contagious. She was right, of course. Over the following months, I watched as other species began to adopt what they called human-style approaches to interspecies cooperation. Instead of trying to force everyone to use the same systems, they started looking for ways to accommodate different approaches to the same problems. It was, according to the galactic news networks, the beginning of a new era in interspecies relations. It was also, according to me, just people finally figuring out how to be practical about getting along. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the most revolutionary thing you could do was to treat an impossible problem as if it were a simple one that just needed the right approach. Maybe the most transformative thing you could do was to refuse to accept that transformation was necessary. Maybe the most human thing you could do was to just be human. 6 months later, I was in the middle of reviewing proposals for the next phase of interspecies integration projects when my door chimed. I opened it to find Zara standing in the corridor, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a delegation of about a dozen beings from various species, all wearing what appeared to be formal diplomatic attire. "Dave Human," Zara said formally. "We have come to make a request." "Okay," I said, stepping aside to let them in. Though I should probably mention that my quarters aren't really designed for large groups. "This is acceptable," said Commander Vex'thari, who was apparently part of the delegation. "We do not require comfort for this conversation." "What conversation?" "The one about your future," said Harmony Singer Vex'thari, who had turned a deep, formal blue color that I'd learned indicated serious business. "My future?" "Dave Human," Zara said. "You have been offered the position of Director of Interspecies Relations for the Galactic Council." I blinked. "I've been offered what now?" "It is a new position," Commander Vex'thari explained, "created specifically to address the increasing complexity of interspecies cooperation throughout the galaxy. The Council has observed the success of your methods here at Nexus 7, Harmony Singer Vex'thari added, her color shifting to what I interpreted as hopeful yellow. "They wish to implement similar approaches on a galactic scale." "That's..." I paused, trying to process this information. "That's a really big job." "Yes," Zara said. "It is. I'm not qualified for a job like that." "Dave Human," said a new voice, and I turned to see a being I didn't recognize, something that looked like a cross between a tree and a very dignified government official. "I am Branch Singer Weltani of the Galactic Council. I have traveled here specifically to discuss this offer with you." "Okay," I said. "But I should probably mention that I don't have any formal training in galactic diplomacy, or galactic anything, really." "This is precisely why you are qualified," Branch Singer Weltani said. "Your lack of formal training is what allows you to approach problems without the preconceptions that limit others." "That's a nice way of saying I don't know what I'm doing." "It is a way of saying that you know exactly what you are doing, even if you do not realize it," Zara said. "Dave Human, you have spent the last year demonstrating that interspecies cooperation is not only possible, but practical. You have developed methods that work not because they are theoretically sound, but because they are human." "What does that mean?" "It means," Branch Singer Weltani said, "that you approach each problem as if it has a solution, and you persist until you find it. It means that you see differences as opportunities rather than obstacles. It means that you believe understanding is always possible. Those aren't uniquely human traits." "Perhaps not," Commander Vex'thari said. "But they are traits that humans consistently demonstrate, and they are traits that the galaxy desperately needs." "The position comes with significant resources," Branch Singer Weltani continued. "A staff of specialists from multiple species, access to the Council's diplomatic networks, and the authority to implement new approaches to interspecies cooperation wherever they are needed." "That sounds terrifying." "It is," Zara said. "But it is also necessary." "Why?" "Because the galaxy is changing, Dave Human. The old ways of managing interspecies relations, the careful protocols, the formal negotiations, the rigid hierarchies, they are not sufficient for the challenges we face. We need someone who can think differently, someone who can find solutions where others see only problems. Someone who is too stubborn to accept that understanding is impossible," Commander Vex'thari added. "I'm not that special," I said. "I'm just a guy who happens to be good at talking to people." "Yes," Branch Singer Weltani said. "That is exactly what makes you special." I looked around the room at the assembled beings, species that had once been strangers, then allies, and now something that felt like friends. They were all looking at me with what I could only describe as expectation. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course," Branch Singer Weltani said. "But perhaps you should know that this offer comes with the unanimous recommendation of every species represented on this station." "All 47 of them?" "All 47, Zara confirmed. "Including the ones that you have not yet worked with directly." "Why?" "Because," Harmony Singer Vex'thari said, shifting to a warm gold color, "you have created something here that none of us thought was possible." "What's that?" "A place where being different is not a disadvantage," she said. "Where diversity is not a problem to be managed, but a strength to be celebrated. That's just logical. No, Zara said firmly. That is human, and it is exactly what the galaxy needs. I spent the next few days thinking about the offer. It was tempting, certainly. The chance to work on a galactic scale, to help solve problems that affected billions of beings across thousands of worlds. The opportunity to make a real difference. But it was also intimidating. The responsibility was enormous, and the stakes were higher than anything I'd ever dealt with before. In the end, it was a conversation with the station's AI that helped me make my decision. I have been observing your work, the AI said during one of our regular check-ins. The patterns are interesting. What patterns? Your approach to problem solving. It is not algorithmic. It does not follow standard diplomatic protocols. It is improvisational. That's one way to put it. It is effective, the AI continued. But more than that, it is inspiring. Inspiring. You demonstrate that solutions exist even when they are not obvious. You show that cooperation is possible even when it seems impossible. You prove that understanding can be achieved even when it requires significant effort. That's just being practical, is it? The AI paused, processing. Dave Human, you have changed how I think about interspecies relations. I had calculated that sustainable cooperation between 47 different species was statistically improbable. You have made it not only probable, but enjoyable. Enjoyable? The satisfaction rating for station life has increased across all species. But more than that, the reports indicate that beings are finding interspecies interaction to be fun. Fun? They are discovering that differences can be delightful rather than threatening. That learning about other species can be exciting rather than stressful. That cooperation can be rewarding rather than difficult. That's good, right? It is unprecedented, the AI said. And it is spreading. Other stations are reporting similar patterns when they implement your approaches. The idea that interspecies cooperation can be enjoyable is transformative. I'm not trying to transform anything. No, the AI agreed. You are simply being yourself, something unexpected. And yourself, it appears, is exactly what the galaxy needs. That night I made my decision. The next morning, I called branch singer Weltani and accepted the position. Excellent, they said. When can you begin? Well, I said, I suppose I should finish up the projects I'm working on here first. Don't want to leave everyone hanging. Of course, take whatever time you need. And I'll need to find someone to take over my responsibilities at the station. Actually, branch singer Weltani said, we have already arranged for Nexus 7 to become a training center for interspecies relations. Beings from throughout the galaxy will come here to learn the approaches you have developed. That's actually a great idea. It was your friend Zarkethel who suggested it. She has agreed to serve as the primary instructor. Zara's going to be a teacher? She says she has learned much from observing your methods. She wishes to share that knowledge with others. I felt a surge of pride at that. Zara had come so far from the warrior who had challenged me to combat over breathing. She'd become someone who understood that the best way to honor strength was to use it in service of understanding. There is one more thing, branch singer Weltani said. The council has asked me to convey a message. What message? They wish to thank you for reminding them that the most important diplomatic skill is not the ability to negotiate, but the ability to listen. Not the ability to win, but the ability to understand. Not the ability to impose solutions, but the ability to find them. That's nice of them to say. It is more than nice, Dave Human. It is recognition of something that your species has taught us. That diplomacy is not about being right, but about being helpful. I hope I can live up to that. You already have, branch singer Weltani said. And that is why we are confident that you will continue to do so. 3 years later, I was reviewing the latest reports from the Interspecies Cooperation Initiative, when my assistant, a being that looked like a cross between a dolphin and a very efficient filing system, informed me that I had visitors. Who is it? I asked. The delegation from Nexus 7, they said. They are here for the annual review meeting. I smiled. The annual review meetings had become one of my favorite parts of the job. They were a chance to catch up with old friends and see how the programs we'd developed were working in practice. Send them in, I said. The door opened, and Zara entered, followed by a group of beings I recognized as the current residents of Nexus 7. But there were also some faces I didn't recognize. New species, new individuals, all wearing the relaxed expressions of beings who had learned to find interspecies interaction enjoyable rather than stressful. Dave Human, Zara said formally, then immediately broke into what I'd learned to recognize as her version of a grin. It is good to see you. It's good to see you too, I said, standing up to greet them. How's the teaching business? Challenging, she admitted, but rewarding. We have had delegations from over 200 species come to study at Nexus 7 in the past year. Any success stories? Many, said Commander Vex'thari, who was still part of the station's leadership council. The Rigid Protocol Coalition has implemented accommodation-based approaches to resource allocation. The Hierarchical Dominance League has developed cooperative decision-making processes. Even the isolationist purists have begun experimenting with limited interspecies collaboration. The isolationist purists? I said. Really? It turns out, Harmony Singer Vex'thari said, shifting to an amused pink color, that once you show beings that they can maintain their cultural identity while still cooperating with others, even the most reluctant species become curious about the possibilities. That's fantastic, I said. What about the new programs? The Interspecies Innovation Network has successfully launched collaborative projects in 47 star systems, Zara reported. The cultural accommodation protocols have been adopted by 63% of Galactic Council member species, and the practical diplomacy training program has graduated over 3,000 certified practitioners. 3,000? The demand for training in human-style diplomatic approaches has exceeded all projections, said a new voice, and I turned to see a being I didn't recognize, something that looked like a cross between a bird and a very serious academic. This is Professor Cliventh, Zara said. She runs the research division at the Interspecies Studies Institute. They've been documenting the spread of what they call practical cooperation methodologies throughout the galaxy. It's fascinating work, Professor Cliventh said, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested excitement. We've identified 17 distinct variations of accommodation-based problem-solving that have emerged from the original Nexus 7 model, each adapted to local cultural conditions, but all maintaining the core principle of finding ways for differences to be assets rather than obstacles. That's actually kind of amazing, I said. It is unprecedented, Professor Cliventh continued. In galactic history, successful diplomatic innovations typically take centuries to spread between species. Your approaches have achieved galaxy-wide adoption in less than 3 years. Why do you think that is? Because, Zara said, they work. And more importantly, they work for everyone. Most diplomatic innovations favor one type of species or cultural approach over others, Professor Cliventh explained. But accommodation-based methods allow each species to contribute their unique strengths while still achieving shared goals. There are no losers, only different types of winners. Plus, Commander Vex'thari added, they are satisfying to implement. There is honor in finding solutions that benefit all parties. There is pride in contributing to something larger than oneself without having to sacrifice what makes one species unique. And there is joy, Harmony Singer Vex'thari said, turning a brilliant gold color, in discovering that differences can be delightful rather than threatening. I felt that familiar surge of pride mixed with amazement. 3 years ago, I'd just been trying to figure out how to make the food dispenser work properly. Now apparently I'd accidentally helped start a galactic revolution in interspecies cooperation. So what's next? I asked. Expansion, said a new voice from the doorway. I turned to see Branch Singer Weltani entering, accompanied by several other beings I recognized as senior members of the Galactic Council. Dave Human, Branch Singer Weltani said formally. We have come to discuss the next phase of the Interspecies Cooperation Initiative. What did you have in mind? The Council has approved funding for the establishment of 50 new cooperation training centers, modeled after Nexus 7, they said. We want to accelerate the spread of practical diplomacy approaches throughout the galaxy. That's ambitious. It is necessary, said another council member, a being that looked like a living constellation. The success of your methods has created demand that exceeds our current capacity to provide training. We have requests from over 800 species who want to learn accommodation-based approaches to interspecies relations. 800? The word is spreading, Zara said. Species that have implemented your approaches are sharing their experiences with their neighbors. The idea that cooperation can be both effective and enjoyable is infectious. In the best possible way, Commander Vex'thari added. We have documented decreases in interspecies conflicts, increases in collaborative projects, and improvements in satisfaction ratings wherever these methods are adopted. But more than that, Harmony Singer Vex'thari said, we have documented something else. What's that? Creativity, Professor Cliventh said. Species that learn to work together using accommodation-based methods don't just cooperate more effectively. They innovate more effectively. They develop solutions to problems that no single species could have solved alone. It makes sense, I said. When you have different perspectives working together, you're going to come up with ideas that none of them would have had individually. Yes, branch singer Weltani said. But the scale of the effect has been surprising. Collaborative innovation projects have produced breakthroughs in energy production, medical treatment, environmental restoration, and space exploration that are advancing galactic civilization at an unprecedented rate. You're saying that teaching people to get along is making everyone smarter? We are saying, the constellation being said, that your species' approach to diversity as an asset rather than an obstacle is transforming how the galaxy thinks about everything. That's... I paused, trying to process the implications. That's a lot of responsibility. It is, Zara agreed. But it is also an opportunity. For what? To continue doing what you do best, she said. Finding practical solutions to impossible problems. The next phase of the initiative will focus on integration rather than just cooperation, branch singer Weltani explained. Instead of simply teaching species to work together, we want to help them build truly integrated multi-species communities. Like what? Research stations staffed by multiple species working on shared projects. Trade centers where different species' economic approaches are combined to create new models of commerce. Even entire worlds where multiple species coexist not just peacefully, but synergistically. That sounds complicated. It does, Zara said. Which is why we need someone who specializes in making complicated things simple. I don't make things simple, I protested. I just approach them differently. Yes, Professor Cliventh said. You approach them as if they are solvable rather than impossible. This is what makes you effective. And it is what makes this initiative possible, branch singer Weltani added. Dave Human, what you have accomplished in 3 years would have taken most species decades to achieve. You have demonstrated that interspecies cooperation is not just possible, but practical. Now we want to see how far that principle can be extended. I looked around the room at the assembled beings, friends, colleagues, and now apparently partners in some kind of galactic transformation that I'd accidentally started by trying to solve a parking dispute. Okay, I said finally. But I have one condition. What condition? No more formal titles, I said. I'm still just Dave. I still solve problems by talking to people and figuring out what they actually need. And I still think the best solutions are usually the simple ones that nobody thought to try. This is acceptable, branch singer Weltani said, and I could hear amusement in their voice. Though you should know that just Dave has become something of a galactic phenomenon. What do you mean? Your name has entered the vocabulary of 17 different languages as a synonym for practical problem solving, Professor Cliventh explained. To pull a Dave means to find a simple solution to a complex problem. To Dave it up means to approach a situation with creative optimism. I felt myself blushing. That's embarrassing. That is recognition, Zara said firmly. Recognition that you have given the galaxy something it did not know it needed. What's that? Hope, she said simply. Hope that differences can be bridges rather than walls. Hope that cooperation is possible even when it seems impossible. Hope that understanding is always within reach if you are willing to work for it. I just did what needed to be done. Yes, she said. And that is exactly why your approach has been so successful. You do not see interspecies cooperation as a grand theoretical challenge. You see it as a series of practical problems that need practical solutions. Because that's what it is. Is it? Branch singer Weltani asked. Or is it what you make it? I thought about that for a moment. 3 years ago, I'd been a guy trying to figure out how to use a food dispenser. Now, apparently, I was leading a galactic initiative that was transforming how hundreds of species thought about cooperation and diversity. The weird thing was, it didn't feel like I'd changed. I was still just solving problems by talking to people and trying to understand what they actually needed. The problems had gotten bigger, and the people had gotten more diverse, but the basic approach was the same. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the most transformative thing you could do was to refuse to be transformed by the scale of the challenge. Maybe the most human thing you could do was to just keep being human, no matter how big the universe got. All right, I said finally. Let's see how far we can take this thing. How far do you think that might be? Professor Cliventh asked. I looked around the room one more time, at beings from dozens of different species, who had learned to work together not despite their differences, but because of them. At friends who had started as strangers, allies who had started as potential enemies, and collaborators who had started as cultural incompatibilities. I have no idea, I said, but I'm looking forward to finding out. Zara laughed, that crystalline sound that had become one of my favorite things about interspecies cooperation. This is very human, she said. What's that? To approach the unknown with curiosity rather than fear. to see infinite possibility as an opportunity rather than a threat. Well, I said, grinning, we've come this far by being curious. Might as well see where it takes us next. And as I looked out the window at the stars, at the hundreds of worlds where beings were learning to see diversity as an asset, cooperation as an adventure, and understanding as an achievement, I felt that familiar surge of stubborn optimism that had gotten me through everything from military training to alien food dispensers to accidentally revolutionizing galactic diplomacy. We might not be the strongest species in the galaxy, or the fastest, or the smartest, but we were the species that refused to give up on the idea that impossible problems might just be problems that nobody had figured out how to solve yet. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. The end.